Okay. So this economic modeling seminar is started with Italian Association of Environmental Resource Economists, the University of Brescia, and so also the European University Institute, Università di Siena, University of Padua and Milan. And also would like to thank a lot FEEM, Fondazione Eni Enrico Mattei, in which we are now today. We're going to host this event. I'd like to thank also the support of European Association of Environmental Resource Economists, the Fondazione UBI Banco di Brescia, I2A, Acque Bresciane, Fondazione Ecogeme, and ALOT. So now I present very quickly our panelists. So the first is Enrico Giovannini, Italian Minister of Sustainable Infrastructure and Mobility. He's a professor of economic statistics at the University of Rome Tor Vergata, co-founder of Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development, that is ASVIS in Italian, chief statistician of OECD from 2001-2009, president of the Italian National Institute of Statistics, ISTAT, from 2009-2014. And the idea is today is also to show you some books, and so we are a reading tip. It is L'Utopia Sostenibile. It was written by, it is a suggestion for reading. So this is the first one. Second is on my left, Alessandro Lanza, that is our executive director of FEEM, Fondazione Enrico Mattei, professor at LUIS. He was a chief economist at ENI, CEO at Eni Corporate University, principal administration at the International Energy Agency, lead author for the third and the fifth assessment report of IPCC. In this case, the reading tip is Lo sviluppo sostenibile. Archaeology. That is part of the history of also our research. The third that is coming, so we are waiting for Renato Mazzoncini, that is Chief Executive Officer and General Manager of A2A, electronic engineer and professor at the Politecnico di Milano, Managing Director and Chief Executive of Gruppo Ferrovie dello Stato from 2015-2008. And the reading tip here is Inversione AE. It is on about sustainability, sustainable mobility. Last on my right is Michael Spence. Thank you very much. And that is a 2001 Nobel Prize in Economics, professor and Dean Emeritus at Stanford University. He is also chair of a Commission on Growth and Development, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, and Philip Knight professor and dean of Stanford Business School, member of American Economics Association, and thank you very much, Mazzoncini. And the reading tip now is the next convergence. Okay, this is the book that is written by Professor Michael Spence. Okay, thank you also, Mazzoncini, that is arrived. Sorry for. And well, it's right the moment in which I start my the introduction of my questions. Before doing to the questions, only an advertisement of the next event that is called Free Thoughts on the Future. That is also the title of a book that we are writing on the interviews. We start after this talk with the Professor Spence. We start with some interviews on the future, on the next 10 years. The next event will be on 21st of July in Brescia, but I will give you more details in future. Okay, now I would like to give you the structure of this presentation today. The structure is this one. Now I will start with four questions, but are only one topic. So this is related to growth, productivity, to all the panelists. So the panelists must answer to this. Obviously, they can choose which are the best point in which way they want to discuss on my questions. After there are other two rounds of questions in which the young researcher of FEEM, that I thank you very much for our work together, they will ask to each of our panelists one question for each one. So the time is running, so I move directly to my questions. So first is that do you think that the net zero emissions goal can actually be achieved by 2050? Which obstacles could slow down its pursuit? The second is technological progress enough to achieve the decarbonization objectives without slowing down the economic growth? What about problems connected to the spread of technology? Is high cost, supply chain bottlenecks, and market inefficiency? The point is is sufficient to have a new technology, or we need something is more complex and we need something more on market and the role of economics. The third is, after the three recent economic crises, we have experienced the global economic system be pushed by monetary and fiscal expansion, which cannot last forever. So inflation is pushing banks towards reducing money supply, which is likely to further slow down the economic recovery. Are we moving towards a recession or stagflation? So then the future on the short run. The last one is productivity growth, so long run. In the developing countries has been on hold for decades, owing to a variety of interacting factors. Is the current transition able to boost productivity, or we do need other instruments? Do we risk or getting locked in a structural productivity slowdown? And which is the money in order to solve this? So summarize this point, is the NZE achievable for 2050? Is technology the solution, or too many economic inefficiency bottlenecks? Without fiscal monetary stimulus at which war and inflation, recession, stagflation, or something else? The last one is, my point of view, is very important, is related to productivity. There is a solution in order to move out on the productivity slowdown. So we start now with Professor Alessandro Lanza, our director, in order to answer to this. Thank you.
How many no do you want? On net zero emission, I have a precise idea, which is the following. There was this discussion about net zero emission, which was around a couple of years. In my view, at the end, the IEA decided to publish a book showing everyone the real consequences of net zero emission seriously by 2050 for the whole world. And at the end of the day, I think it's simply impossible, because there are some countries, we tend to consider always China and India. By the way, there are other countries that are never mentioned in this discussion, but they are as important as China and India. Malaysia, Indonesia are huge, Brazil are huge countries. So if you are serious in saying net zero emission by 2050, and the question is, do you think it's possible? I think it's not possible. By the way, I won't be here in 2050, so I cannot be.
So it's safe.
I cannot be
Forecast.
So
Right.
this is an easy forecast. And again, obstacle. Of course, there are many obstacles, and first of all, there are a precise difference of objectives among big countries. Considering this final target. Of course, Europe, or if you prefer, OECD countries can be different. For sure, OECD countries will move towards that direction. But I don't think that there is a solution if we consider the whole world. So, which is the question number 3. There is any solution to suggest how to overcome the above mentioned. Of course, it will be technological cooperation, but we tend to be more, paternalistic in this respect, because we are always still talking about technology transfer. China doesn't need technology transfer, so the technology transfer is the other way around now. So probably countries like continent like Africa, probably they need technological transfer, but that is not the problem. China has lots of problem, and then Professor, we will talk. Professor Sapelli is arrived. I recognize the telephone. Where do you see the world in 10 years? Now, of course, this is a very difficult question, but to some extent, basically, I think it need to be defined in geographical and level of development step. I'm sure that in 10 years' time, Europe will be different, in the sense that probably, definitely, there will be more renewable, less fossil fuel. By the way, you need to know that once again, the fossil fuel share on total energy consumption is 80% in Europe, and guess the number in 1990, 80%. So after all the discussion about how smart we are in renewable energy, in green energy, the fossil fuel is exactly the same it was 20 years ago. So we expect lots of investment in electrification, which is a serious issue, of course. Electric cars in general, this electrification movement that can can change the situation. So in 10 years, the world I don't know, but Europe will be a different place for sure. No idea. Of course, there will be a huge, in principle, there would be a huge distribution of income, in the sense that 95% of the global GDP will be made by machine. We need philosophers. We need people that suggest us how to invest our time, since we need to work, say, half a day per week. So it's a social problem. Then there will be a huge distribution of money, and the world will be. So if all will be artificial intelligence, I'm not sure that I have an answer what will be the future of us. But you know, this is a long. I'm very puzzled by these ideas. But like the 2050, I won't be here, so I can speculate in any direction.
Question.
Oh,
Okay.
all right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'll try not to repeat some very important points that were just made. I don't think there's a very good chance that the world will get to net zero by 2050. I'm pretty confident Europe will. And I'm pretty sure the United States and Canada won't. Let me explain why. 10 years ago, we were at 20 tons, 20 tons per person of emissions when Europe was at 10. Europe's at 5 or 6. We've done better. We're down at 15, but we got a long way to go. And there's questions that we could debate endlessly about the wavering political will associated with this that may or may not be present. China now emits 9.5 billion tons. It's just approximately twice as large as Europe or America. And that's bad news. And they're still growing, but they're pretty aggressive about it. And it was, as the point was just made, they have a lot of technology. So I believe their goal, I think you all know, in the developing world, the sustainability challenge is a race between growth and decarbonization, basically. You can think of it very precisely in mathematical terms. If you take the growth rate, out there, and then ask yourself, in 30 years, what does it take to get to lower the carbon emissions by a certain amount, you can calculate the annual rate of decrease of the carbon intensity of all of those economies. So if the global economy is going to, this looks a little optimistic at the moment, but it's going to grow at 3%, and we're going to hit 2050, the carbon intensity has to decline by something like 6 to 7% a year. And that's kind of hard to see how it's going to happen. The good news is about China is, and I think they're serious about this, is they're going to peak before 2030. And while that may not do the job in terms of net zero by 2050, it's a pretty important event in terms of at least a partial assault on the climate change challenge. But then again, I'm repeating something that you said, but India is at 1/3 of the per capita GDP, has a potential growth rate of 8%. And looks like they're fairly committed. If you look at the commitments they've actually made, China said 2060 for net zero. India said 2070. Directionally, that's correct. You know, you wouldn't expect a country with a per capita income of 3,000 and an unknown batch of technology, et cetera, to get this done, to commit to something that's as aggressive as the more plausible choices in Europe. And there are other countries as well. Although, I will tell you, having just done this calculation a couple of months ago, if you take the top 6 emitters now, treating Europe as a unit, they account for something like 70% of global emissions. But that'll change, right? I mean, these high growth countries, even the ones that are peanuts now, in terms of their economic mass in the global economy, are not going to stay that way forever. At least we hope they aren't, or their citizens hope they aren't. Another way to think about this is to ask about investment. So there's a relatively widespread agreement that we need an incremental something on the order of $3.5 trillion of investment globally. Probably a mix of public and private, maybe 50-50. I don't know. Nobody really knows. But it certainly can't be done without the public sector side. That's manageable. I mean, the global economy is somewhere between 70 and 80 trillion dollars now. So it's not a trivial number as a fraction, but it's not unrealistic. But we are entering a world of inflation and rising interest rates and sovereign debt overhangs left over from the pandemic of varying degrees of severity, but it's pretty much a global phenomenon. And so you have to ask yourself the question, in addition to this question about will, I don't worry about that question much in Europe. I do worry about it in the country I'm a citizen of. But there's also this question of, you know, can you get the job done? Now, hopefully what I just described is a transitory phenomenon. I don't mean it'll go away next year. I mean, sovereign debt overhangs don't go away quickly. And nor do aging populations, which is another headwind to growth and so on. So I think it's a mixed bag. But I guess the most important thing is the fact that we're not going to make it is not an excuse for trying as hard as we can. On technology, I think there's a simple answer, so I won't go on. Technology is critical. We have a lot of it already, I imagine, but I've heard 70 or 80% of what we need, but we don't have it all. You know, we don't have fusion, we don't have low carbon hydrogen, we don't have scalable carbon capture or whatever, you know, recycling. So there's a fair amount of technology developed, but it certainly can't be just technology. We need incentives. And now I'll take a little aside here, if I may. You know, Europe is facing a huge shock in the form of the war in the Ukraine, and energy prices globally have shot up. Europe is not, unlike the United States, kind of energy neutral, meaning roughly speaking, we produce as much as we consume over there. And it's perfectly legitimate to protect consumers when you get a spike of that magnitude. I had this conversation with Minister Giovannini about a week ago. But that's kind of like half the right answer, right? The other half is don't have a party when the energy prices go way down, right? If you're going to put a ceiling on it, put a floor on it as well. And have a sensible, but this has been argued, you know, for a long, long time, and nobody ever does anything about it. So consumers cry and scream, and governments are under great pressure when the energy prices spike. But when they go down to $20 a barrel in the gas equivalent, you know, everybody's happy, right? Except for the people who are investing in alternatives, who don't like to have the floor kicked out from under them, you know, every time the energy markets go the way they did. So that's just a plea for some far-sighted policy targeted at incentives and investments. So we are going to have to find a way, directly or indirectly, to put incentives in place. This is frequently talked about as pricing carbon. And now I'll be brief because I've talked too long. But I'm an economist, so I'm supposed to say something about this. We are going to have recessions in some parts of the world. Russia is an obvious choice. I think Europe may have a recession. For those of you who aren't, don't do this day to day, a recession is 2 quarters of negative growth, meaning half a year. I don't personally understand the fixation with recessions, right? We're going to have a huge global growth slowdown. We're in the middle of it now. And that's going to hurt a lot of people and put a lot of things, up in the air in terms of question. Whether it's a recession or not depends on where you are. I'm sure some low-income countries are going to have a recession because they were already reeling from the pandemic. I don't think America will have a recession, but they could. And some credible people are saying the risks are rising. But I think the thing to take away from this is we're going to have a big growth slowdown, and we already have inflation. So let me say something about stagflation. Stagflation is a sort of persistent condition in which you have inflation and essentially very low or no growth. I don't think that's very likely, frankly. We're going to have inflation for a while, probably longer than most people, including central bankers, hope, because the supply chains are clogged up, because we don't have deflationary forces anymore. We've used up a substantial amount of the unused productive capacity in the global economy, et cetera. But we have pretty powerful tools to generate a productivity surge in the digital technologies and a number of other areas. And so it would take a fairly large amount of bad luck and mistakes, which I don't expect either governments or businesses to make, to put us in the position of having the low growth part of this. So I guess we'll have inflation, but I'm not sure we'll have stag, is a crude way to say that. And on the productivity slowdown, I think there's a reasonable chance we'll reverse it, but not in the next 2 to 3 years. So short final summary, the next 2 to 3 years are going to be really tough. There's some very serious risks that you all know about that have nothing to do with economics. They have to do with conflict and whatnot. But barring the occurrence of those, then there'll be turbulence. The asset markets have gone crazy again because they were way, way overvalued before, partly as a result of monetary policy and partly as a result of excessive exuberance in the digital acceleration in the pandemic. And they're probably overshooting the downward direction. So this will feel like a pretty big storm, but it's not a kind of permanent condition. So I'll stop.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Enrico Giovannini. Enrico, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and again, good afternoon. I will start from maybe 3 questions simultaneously, not because it's an easy task, but simply to underline the fact that maybe we are not considering the big shift, also in terms of metrics, that this revolution will imply. If we have people, for example, that will not use car anymore just to move around their house by using just walking or bicycles, what is going to happen to productivity? Is it going up or down? I think that will go down because the unit value of a car is higher than a bicycle, and the energy, instead of being bought at the pump and so on, will come from less. This means that all the economic indicators will show a decline. But the well-being of the citizens of that city will go up. If you apply this approach to the ecological transition, you may have similar results. And once more, as you know, I've been working on these for several years. The macroeconomic measurement will be more and more biased. more we move towards the ecological transition, more the classical economic indicators will fail in telling us what's going on. Alessandro Lanza said that in 2050 you will not be there, you will not be able to check what will happen and so on. Well, I'm 65. There are 28 years left to 2050. It's unlikely, but not impossible, that I will be there in 2050. But one of the things that will allow me to be there or not to be is indeed the level of pollution in our cities. We have in Italy 50,000 early deaths due to pollution, especially in our cities. If with a magic wand we could eliminate overnight pollution, we will avoid to lose 50,000 early deaths. And we will have many more people in our country, other things equal, who will be able to consume, who will be able to live, first of all. How is this going to be reflected in the macroeconomic indicators? Well, the point is that we are doing what we are doing to improve the well-being of our planet and the well-being of our life, which is not measured by macroeconomic indicators. On the contrary. So I think that we should quickly, if we want to answer the logic of your questions, we have to quickly integrate or change the indicators by which we will assess whether this transition will be a success or a failure. Of course, we know the rules of economics, and Michael Spence mentioned some of them. But I can tell you that at Davos 2 weeks ago, it was impressive the way in which private companies, leaders in various sectors, are taking, how serious they are taking this issue of transformation and transition, ecological transition, also due to a problem of reputation. And I'm not sure that we are considering this element in our economic models. We learn how to deal with the loss of reputation or high reputation of central banks. But for the moment, we have not yet considered, together with relative prices, this element of reputation vis-à-vis the climate change that can produce huge, potentially huge changes in consumers' behaviors. If our models will just be based on the usual way of considering utility and the elements of a consumption function, I think that we risk to lose the capacity of understanding what is happening and what will be happening. Of course, financial markets are already working in terms of ESG with a lot of greenwash. We know very well this. But if this is taken seriously, I think that our models and, as I said, measurement tools need to be changed. Because the objective of our policies will be different. And we cannot just use the classical functions if the purpose of what we are doing changed so dramatically. Again, on your first question, is net zero emission possible by 2050? I agree with Alessandro and Michael. It's very unlikely that at world level this will happen. But I think that the right question is it convenient to be in the front runner, in the group of front runners, or is it more convenient to be in the followers, in the group of followers? This is something that is relevant for policies today, not just talking about what will happen, but what is the advantage for us to be, in relative terms, among the innovators or among those who resist to the innovation. And in this perspective, my answer is definitely that the cost of being in the followers, the group of followers, will be much higher than to be in the group of innovators and leaders. Also because due to the fact that we will not achieve by 2050 the net zero emission scenario, we will pay anyway for the cost of not achieving that result in terms of impact of climate change on weather disasters, in terms of scarcity of water, food scarcity, and so on and so forth. Of course, this will not disappear if we are in the group of good countries, while the rest of the world will not achieve that, because climate change will continue. But if we decide to invest in terms of resilience of our system, and in doing that, we will develop technologies, solutions that can be sold or transferred to the rest of the world. Europe, or the group of innovators, or you want to call it, will have a huge opportunity of not only helping the other countries, and so the world, but also selling their products, which will not be counted in the GDP of Italy, but will be transferred in a sense in terms of better GDP or better well-being of other parts of the world. So in conclusion, I think that notwithstanding the high costs or the risks, we are at the ministry looking at all different technologies, for example, from motorcycles to the aviation sector. We have published few reports over the last 6 months on the impact of climate change on infrastructures and mobility systems, on the technological opportunities to transform our transport system into a sustainable mobility system, and so on and so forth. We are convinced that through appropriate investments, we can also help and send signals to the innovators in the private sector, not only based in Italy, not only based in Europe, but based also elsewhere, that here there is an open area for innovation, experimentation as well. And Europe, from my point of view, can really become the front runner at the world level of this transition, even if with a lot of advantages, also in terms of employment, in terms of income, in terms of quality of life, especially in our cities, even if the rest of the world will join later. So I think that, just to conclude, the private sector and the financial sector has understood much more than some political groups that this is the only way to go, and we need to leverage these innovators, these opportunities we have in front of us in order to speed up the process and not to slow down.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for your answer. So change on the indicators and so new to be front runner. Now I'll leave you the floor to Renato Mazzoncini for these questions. Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Well, starting from the first question, in 2019, exactly with the work with FEEM and Jeffrey Sachs, we presented at COP25 a work named Roadmap 2050, a manual for nations for decarbonization, working on the fourth sector: building, mobility, energy production, industry, to say to the world, yes, guys, it's possible to arrive working together in all the sectors. And let's say in COP25 that was in Madrid, because there was the civil war in Santiago in that period, the feeling was completely different than today. So was really another world. You know? I remember the pavilion of United States with the payoff, "We are still in," because Donald Trump decided to go out from COP, and the fantastic guys from USA brought the pavilion, "We are still in." Fantastic. Well, but was really a complete another world before pandemic. After pandemic, let's say the feeling that it's possible to arrive to 2050 changed completely. In my personal opinion, is not an issue about the actual possibility to achieve, because simply we absolutely need to do it. So the discussion is possible or not? Yes, it's possible. Surely, actually, what we know at the moment is that current policies for decarbonization are not aligned to the achievements of this target, surely. So we have to work a lot. For example, talking about energy, is absolutely impossible to arrive to 2050 net zero only with electron. We need to increase a lot electron. Today, for example, in Italy, we use only 20% of electron on the total primary energy. The other is molecular, gas, petrol. So we have to push the electrification, but in this moment, let's say, the name and surname of the green electron is known. So aeolic, hydro production, solar production. Then the name and surname of the green molecular is not so easy, because it's biofuel, bioenergy, biomethane, hydrogen, but exactly how to produce in the money is not so clear. So absolutely we have to invest, to have to work, but we still have some time, 3 decades. So you are young, you have to work for to arrive to no, this is very important. So this is the first. The second question about the cost, also in this case, the answer is simple. Is more the cost to do or not to do? Because it's clear that the cost of no decarbonization scenario, so the cost to recover the world in 2050 after the increasing of temperature more than 2 degrees is much higher. So I think that it's very important to be able to look the two scenarios. So decarbonization, don't decarbonization. So to decide is simply which is the more expensive one. And I'm sure that is less expensive to invest in decarbonization. In short term, industries probably take advantage to invest in reducing emission, because there is an increasing of cost of CO2 and so on. But overall, at the national global level, I think that the reality is probably that decarbonization means investing something gradually to avoid the sad effects of emissions in the future. So the third is very critical, and I'm very happy that there is our friend Enrico Giovannini from our government with us now, because since Friday we are very afraid about our central bank, European Central Bank, because European Central Bank has recently announced the end of quantitative easing, opening a let's say, an uncertain scenario about inflation and consequently possibility of investment and so on. So I think that the only chance that we have to avoid a recession in productivity and so on is to move together. So we need to go in the direction of decarbonization, investment and so on together with all the front runner that want to do. And Europe decided to lead this very important goal, and it's very important to stay together. So we need to avoid a fragmented response at European level. This is very, very important from an economic point of view, because the risk is really recession. And the last, so productivity, let's say, it's not easy for me to connect directly ecological transition to productivity, because in my mind, the main factor that it can contribute to ensure growth in productivity is digitalization. And so I think that the instruments that we have could be enough, mostly if we think to the huge amount of money that are spent in digitalization, with the old, for example, within our PNRR, 40 billion euros only in Italy. It's very important that all this money arrive really to produce a digital world, and the digital world surely, like productivity, will be much, much better than the past one.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I ask to the researcher to come here for the questions, so to prepare the question. Given that our minister Giovannini must to leave at a certain point, I ask to do the first question to him. So we start to Ilaria. Okay, perfect. So now only to speak to the panelists. Now the four researchers will ask you for each one where is one question, and after I give you the floor to answer to their questions. So.
Thank you, Minister Giovannini. I'd like to ask you a question about the fact that recently the European Union has approved a proposal to stop selling diesel and gasoline cars in 2035. So I want to ask you if Italy is ready to meet this goal in terms of, for example, charging stations for electric vehicles, and what could be the contribution of electric vehicles to the stabilization of the grid, I mean the vehicle-to-grid technology, if you could answer this. Thank you.
Okay, now the second question is from Massimiliano. Okay.
Thank you. I have a question to our director, Professor Lanza. I want to ask whether the current geopolitical situation, given the war in Ukraine, is going to affect the energy transition, given the risk about the supply disruption for rare metals, the effects of rising energy prices, and also the questions about the energy security, the energy dependency from the countries. So thank you.
Okay, now the floor is for Edward. So the microphone. Okay.
All right, my question is for Spence. Sorry to interrupt. So you've just underscored the importance of that the adoption of digital technology would have in boosting productivity, and but in previous talks you've also underscored that for some reason or the other some sectors are lagging behind in innovation in digital technologies. Also on top of that, there are concerns related to the effect that automation would have in terms of job losses, and the fact that, for example, the disproportionate profits for companies on the frontier would not be translated in lower prices for consumers. So I would like to ask you why there is this reluctance in some sectors in investing in digital innovation, or has been. Is it somehow changing now, in your opinion? And whether do you see a role for the public sector to take the lead and driving this innovation?
Okay, perfect. Last is Eduardo. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a question for Professor Mazzoncini. Regarding basically the coal phase-out process that is going on in Italy in these years, I was wondering if the prices, the recent gas and electricity prices, which are quite high, are, for example, posing some risks to this process that is going on, the coal phase-out, knowing also that A2A is working on that with the Monfalcone power plant. And maybe you also mentioned hydrogen. Can hydrogen play a sort of role in maybe substituting the coal power plants in some way, given the fact that A2A is working also on the hydrogen valley in Val Camonica? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now I leave the floor to Enrico Giovannini. So we start from you.
Thank you. Well, the question is about the car sector, but we shouldn't forget that the Fit for 55 package is much broader than that. And if we lose this overall perspective, even if we stay in the transportation system, we risk to be biased. Why am I saying that? The automotive sector goes from motorcycles to planes, airplanes, sorry, to heavy trucks and so on. Then you also have the maritime sector and then the air sector. In our report, the decarbonizing transport, we have tried to look at all the different dimensions, from motorcycles to cars to light commercial vehicles, heavy commercial vehicles, buses, and so on and so forth, looking at the different technological alternatives. And we identified sort of optimal distribution of different fuels and vectors according to not only the choices that are emerging from the private sector, but also the possibility of having all the different technologies available in our country or in Europe. It's clear that the big companies are thinking about electric vehicles, cars, light commercial vehicles. On the heavy trucks and so on, they're split between hydrogen and electric. But then when we go to maritime and air transport sectors, we are really on the hard to abate sector. I will leave it a little bit aside. Now the point is that it's clear that there will be costs in terms of reducing the pieces, for example, that are needed to build a classical engine. But there are also opportunities if we are able to produce here, for example, buses that are imported so far. We have to replace more than 45,000 buses, which are not ecological. So it's a huge amount of production, and then the maintenance and the replacement. We don't have strong producers in Italy. We are mainly importing from China and Eastern countries. But we would be able to produce these kind of products. And this is why we have put money to stimulate the creation of a national production chain. And the same applies to other sectors of the automotive. Therefore, to replace the question, is 2035 the optimal moment to stop the sale of new cars, which are not net zero emissions characteristics? I would recommend to look at the whole system of automotive in order to invest on national production opportunities, to retrain people to build new opportunities exactly now that several countries, several companies are thinking about reshoring their production plants towards Europe. So, but let me also conclude with the need to recognize that people are changing behaviors. Therefore, I think that there is no way to go back to a supposed golden age when, for example, in Italy, we have millions of new cars every year, because the new generation, and I'm looking at you, and so I would reverse the question to you, don't look at the cars as our generation was looking at them. So I mean that behavioral changes need to be factored in this discussion. New ways of slow mobility, or the preference for example, trains instead of using other more polluting transport systems and so on, is something that we need to take into consideration in order to accompany this cultural change with the production inside Italy of those who are in line with these evolving preferences, especially by new generations.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for your answer. So now leave floor to Alessandro Lanza on
unfortunately, I have to go. I have to catch a plane. And I would like to thank you, all of you, all the speakers, especially Michael, whom we were in contact a time ago. And I hope that FEEM will continue to call Italy, not only Italy, to invest in research, conceptual and applied research, as it has done over the years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Ciao. Very difficult question. Considering the 4 minutes, probably 4 minutes for 4 lines is probably not easy. There are many issues in this question that is very difficult to give an answer for a number of different reasons. Reason number one, we don't have a clue. At least I don't have a clue about how the war in Ukraine could continue, and this, of course, will change the overall situation. The problem, so setting aside this dramatic problem, the issue is not about energy security. I think the future. So now we were in the midst of this war, why Italy was depending from Russia by 40% and Germany by 60%. I think, yes, on natural gas, of course. I think that what will happen at the end of this process, that we will tend not to put all the eggs in the same basket. So basically, and this, by the way, will be more expensive for sure. So if you divide our demand, our imports, instead of one single country like Russia, in many different countries, we will be more expensive, because the cost of natural gas from Russia is still $8 per MMBTU. That means it's a cheap option. So if you want to divide for the sake of security into pieces, at the end will be more expensive. It is true for us, for any other country. On green technologies, solar panel, I guess there is something they need to be underlined. First of all, I don't believe that we need to reestablish a sort of barriers to trade. In the sense, we need to trade. There is no need to call upon David Ricardo 18 something on international trade on Principia, so really long time ago. So say that we don't need to import from that country for a number of different reasons, but it's also true, and that's something that we need to find a solution. There is a paradoxical effect that we invest, knowing the story of learning curves. We as Europe, we invest billions of dollars on solar, knowing that increasing the scale of the production will decrease the unit cost. At the end of the day, today, all solar panels are coming from China. So we basically invest in order to get the best technology we can get, and now we have lost that technology, which is a paradoxical effect. I don't have the solution unless the solution is to continue to invest in solar panel with higher efficiency. But you know, there is a technological level that can be reached. We probably need to invest in panels that are supposed to use less rare materials, which is another crucial issues that we need probably talk for another couple of days probably. I don't think there is a reason why there will be an increase in fossil fuel price. The situation, the global macroeconomic situation, has been perfectly described by Professor Spence. I think that the time of let's say whatever it takes, it's over. For obviously, it seems clear that that time. The idea to defend the euro, say, okay, forget about start a war we get against the euro because we will defend the euro whatever it takes. My feeling is that the war is, I would say, is lost, but is over. It seems to me that Madame Lagarde is not inclined to defend the euro that way. So we have more inflation, less GDP, so on and so forth. So I guess I have answered probably half of your question, but it's very interesting and very we can continue to discuss for the next couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you. So we know there are a lot of questions. Okay, now we leave the floor to Michael Spence for his question.
Right. So the question was addressed to me. It's on digital technology and its accelerators and potential retardants. Renato also spoke about digital at the end of his speech. So I'll try to be brief, and you may want to add some points to this. So these are, how do I say it? Very big transitions of this type or transformations, A, take a long time, and B, they're disruptive, and they have distributional consequences. And when you combine that with the natural tendency of both individuals and organizations, if the status quo is satisfactory, basically to under-experiment, to use you know, the term that economists and social scientists use. Now, the opportunity set differs across sectors. I would say where we are now is the tech sector and finance and a number of others are pretty advanced in this respect. And then if you looked at the picture before the pandemic, there were lagging sectors. I mean, healthcare is a classic example. They just, you know, basically didn't want to hear about it. And then the pandemic came along and produced it, and education, my area similarly. And the pandemic came along and produced an acceleration. Now the markets, you know, got it wrong in the sense, not in the sense it was something fundamentally changing, but they thought the accelerating pattern would continue longer than it was likely to. And so we have a sort of valuation problem on the investment side in this. But you see this in the kind of startup growth company areas. But I think it's changing pretty fast. Now, just a few other factors. One, these technologies are radically different enough that I think the vast majority of people, say in the corporate world, have understood that there's something fundamental that they need to be thinking about. But if you did a survey and said, does everybody know where they need to go? The answer would be no, right? So we're still, I mean, with AI, you know, with whatever the metaverse is, it's a little hard for people my age to understand, you know, Web 3.0 and the metaverse. But I listened to a guy, you know, in the last 2 days in a conference in Edinburgh describe the use of gaming technology to design, rapid design techniques. And it was pretty convincing. The last thing I'll say is some of the implementation problems are really hard. But I'm not so worried about the labor part that you asked about. The reason is we live in aging societies for the most part, at least a lot of us do. And so this notion that we're going to put a lot of people out, but they're already disappearing from the labor force, you know, in large numbers. So if we have productivity benefits and can solve to some extent the distributional, it's these transitional distributional things, I think actually that problem is not quite as severe. But there is one very severe problem that we are going to have to work together on. Data is absolutely crucial in virtually this whole thing. And we are in the process of figuring out how to regulate and manage responsibly data. And we're not at the end of that. And we're not going the same direction. You know, so Europe's gone one direction and is in some ways in the lead, and China's gone a different direction, and the United States is fumbling around, trying to figure it out with 50 states with their own rules and whatnot. But let me give you an example of why it's so crucial. So take global supply chains, which are all sort of congested and screwed up right now. That is a system that is entirely, it's A, incredibly complicated, and B, it's constructed in an entirely decentralized fashion. And it works beautifully as long as you don't deliver any shocks to it, okay? But shock it, and nobody knows what's going on. There is not a single player in the world, government or private sector, that has a clue about what the state of that system is. And the reason is nobody has a big enough database, not even Maersk, you know, one of the big shippers. They have pieces, right? So I went to a conference with the major, you know, companies, you know, big companies that operate in these supply chains like Under Armour and Nike and et cetera. And they're trying to figure out the solution to this problem. And the hard part of answering, they can make this thing more efficient, but they can't do it using only their own data. They got to figure out an institutional way that the regulators will support to pool the data and deliver actionable insights into the state of the system that allow adaptive behavior and response to shocks. And the shocks are coming from all over the place, right? Climate, geopolitical tensions, pandemics, you know, it just goes on and on. And they haven't solved that problem. That is a really hard problem, but it involves an institutional innovation of the type that we haven't seen before. So I wish I could tell you what the answer is, but I don't know. Renato, do you have other things you want to say about the digital one? Or maybe you want to answer your question and answer that one too.
I shift to coal. I fully agree with you.
No, talking about coal, let's say, if you look, Italy is a peanuts. Consider that in 2010, the contribution of coal in the total energy demand was 7%. In 2019, 3%. So completely marginal. And in this moment, the price of the energy produced with coal is in the middle between gas, very high, and renewable, very low. So the phase out of coal in Italy is not a topic. In China is different because the price of energy increased before the war between Russia and Ukraine. And probably one of the reasons is that if you produce energy with gas, the total CO2 emission is 50% less than the production with coal. And our friends from China has a agenda for decarbonization. And in this agenda, there is also the shift between coal, they use a lot of coal, and gas. So it's clear that the gas demand worldwide is growing mainly for this question. And the big phase out from coal is surely not in Europe. Is outside Europe, in particular in China. So this is a topic. Is fundamental to phase out coal if we want to arrive to 2050 decarbonized. But let's say there is in the middle between coal and renewable, there is gas. Also in Europe we did it. So and hydrogen, yes, hydrogen. Pay attention. You know that hydrogen is storage, is not a source of energy. In this moment, is in the money green hydrogen? No. The hydrogen produced by steel reforming from methane cost €2 per kilo. For renewable, 13, 14. It depends on the cost of energy, but it's very, very expensive. So if you go to a steel plant in Lombardy and you speak, because they use hydrogen for some application, you say, oh, do you want to change your hydrogen from steel reforming from methane with green hydrogen? They say yes, next year, because in this moment this is mobility is different, because mobility is probably the trade-off between diesel traction in heavy mobility, so some trains, heavy truck, buses, interurban buses for long haul and so on. The trade-off is with the price of €8 for kilos. And we are working, for example, to produce, and this is funny, we are working to produce biohydrogen, so hydrogen produced with an electrolyzer connected to a waste to energy plant that we have in Brescia, so near the railway lines that we want to decarbonize with hydrogen. So the idea is, in a waste to energy plant, more or less 50% of energy is green energy, because it's the part biodynamic that we burn, okay? So it's green energy. We use it in the electrolyzer. We produce, so in our opinion, green hydrogen. The cost is lower than renewable, because the waste to energy plant work 88,000 hours for year, not 1,000 like a solar plant. So the load factor of the electrolyzer, of the capex, is much better, and so the cost is low. The problem is that there is a European taxonomy that is not able to say which is the color of this hydrogen. So we are working, because in the RED II directive, probably the more similar is biogas, because hydrogen is a gas, this is sure. Arrives from waste, so bio, this is sure. And so we are trying to do some lobby at European level to say, okay, in our opinion, if we produce hydrogen in this situation, and we are able to produce it to €8 per kilo, so the trade-off for mobility is ready, we can start, because the use of hydrogen starts from demand. Without demand, there is no investment and so on in hydrogen. So, but all the studies says that in 2050, in a world decarbonized in 2050, the role of hydrogen in the primary energy will be more or less 12%, 13%. So not zero, not peanuts. So we have to invest.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we have 3 questions, with the last questions. So we ask to Chiara, Emanuele, and Chiara, the last. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for Professor Spence. Given that crude oil is the most important commodity traded around the world, also because it is a crucial asset for financial investment, and policies aimed at reducing CO2 emissions are pushing for replacing this commodity with some more, let's say, sustainable alternatives, will cause the problem of replacing also in terms of financial markets this traded commodity. And given, for example, the fact that the market of crude oil is valued, let's say, $1.5 trillion per year. This is going to completely reshape the scenario for financial markets. So how do you expect this to change the international scenario in financial markets? And if there is some other commodity that can replace oil, for example, some crucial minerals for the energy transition, what will it be? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I have a question for Professor Mazzoncini. I would like to go back to the question regarding the productivity. So you have just started to answer with the digitalization, but I want to focus more on Italy, because we know that we have a really low productivity in the last decades, and the aim of the PNRR is to recover also the productivity through a series of investment in physical and human capital. So in your opinion, what are the sectors, also from a technical point of view, that will benefit more from this type of investments? And regardless of this program, what do you think in the future will be the most important technical advancements that we will observe in Italy that can promote economic growth in Italy?
And lastly, to Professor Lanza. So first of all, thank you to you, Professor Lanza, and to you, Professor Vergalli, for having hosted this wonderful event. I think I'm saying what many of us is thinking right now. So we have such a great panelist table today. We have the CEO of a very important Italian utility company. We have the Nobel Prize. We had previously the Italian minister. And we are in FEEM, who is holding the event, and that is one of the main research institution in energy and economic studies. So my question would be the following. What do you think about this kind of events? Do you think that these roundtables are important? And even more importantly, what do you think we can take from this discussion to make like a real change, a real impact? Thank you.
Oh, good. Well, thank you for that question. So I'm going to try to answer it briefly, but I'm going to do it with a story. So a very good friend of mine is a man named John Brown. He's Lord Brown of Mattingly, and he is the former chairman of BP and now an investor in actually in a little company that's connected with General Atlantic, which is a growth equity firm. And it's called Beyond Net Zero. And we were talking the other day, and so here's why I think it's relevant. In any version of what we've been talking about today, this is a multi-decade transition. And one of the reasons we're in trouble right now, globally, is that we got around to deciding not to invest in a whole bunch of capacity, including in the fossil fuel area. So our stocks are low. You know, we're running this thing too tight, and then you shock it, and sure enough, you're where we are. John Brown came to Stanford University 25 years ago, almost to the day, and gave a speech in which he said, as the CEO of one of the biggest petroleum firms in the world, we've got to take this, you know, alternative energy business seriously. And he was attacked by the entire rest of the industry. I mean, Exxon Mobil went nuts, hired people to sort of tear him apart. And so we were talking, and you know, it's been a kind of interesting change, but in the last 25 years. And if you're interested, he gave another speech reflecting on this last 25 years. But the point I want to make is the problem isn't as dramatic as you made it suggest, because I'm not suggesting you overstated it, but we're not going to disappear $1.5 trillion, in the short run. At least not if we're smart. We're going to do it over 3 decades or whatever. I mean, I'm speaking roughly, but I think the thing that worries me greatly is finding a balance between the commitment to real change, the ecological transition, on the one hand, and constructing sensible policies, you know, multi-decade policies that make this transition work, and sort of cutting off, you know, traditional sources of energy too quickly is not one of the ways to do this. So, and so if you think of this as happening slowly, I mean, slowly by as comparison, slowly is the wrong term, but at a measured pace with some urgency over, let's say, 3 to 4 decades. During that period, these folks will find other things to do. They will become, some of them will become players in the world of alternative energy. So yes, it will, if we took it away right away, it would leave a gigantic hole in the financial system, just as you said. But I think my real answer is this: it will be more gradual in that, because there is no way to practically do that.
Well, talking about productivity, when our government in 2020 went to Brussels to negotiate the PNRR, the European Commission, let's say, didn't enter into the quality of the project to finance. The deal was money versus reform. This was the deal. This is the deal, because we have to do this reform till next summer. So we have another 10 months, 12 months. So which kind of reform? Competition law, public administration, and justice. So the 3 key elements to be a more modern and productivity country. So this is the real deal, because if you think that the European Community entered into the fact that was a good idea to finance renewable on an high-speed train between Naples and Reggio Calabria and so on, no, there was not this discussion. The discussion was, okay, guys, we can put on the table money able to do a new Marshall Plan in Italy, but versus reform. So I think that is, let's say, an indirect effect. And if we want not to give back all this money, we have to do it. And this is the biggest problem that in this moment our government has on the table. And in fact, if you think, simply looking the newspaper, the discussion about the competition law in some, in some topic, you can understand how it's difficult with all the lobbies that we have in our country to move forward. But this is, in my opinion, the key elements that can really change something talking about productivity. And it's true that if we compare in the last 20 years, the level of productivity that we have in Italy, also with other countries, also Germany, France, and so on, the problem is big, surely. And in a moment in which we are talking about reshore, it is much more important to be a good country able, because we have lots of ingredients in Italy that works very well, because we have industry, we have fantasy, research. We need only to be a little bit more organized, let's say, really like public administration, justice, and to be more on the market.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much. So we leave the last question. It is to our director.
Dear Chiara. The answer to your question is basically in this room, in the sense that I cannot promise a Nobel Prize per week, neither a CEO per week, nor a minister per week. But if you cut some outliers like me, Sergio, Professor Galeotti, the average age here is between 25 and 30. So the future is here as long as there is a support and the money of our precious founder. We will continue forever. This is in short my answer. We will continue this activity next week and then seminars and then another seminar, and we will always be here forever and ever. That's the situation. And they're very useful, of course, but
Okay, thank you very much. So we can conclude here. Thank you very much to Mike Spence, to Renato Mazzoncini, and our guests. Thank you. Thank you also to all the participants here and online. I see you the next time in 21st of July. Thank you very much.